Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The storm came without warning, as they always did in these cursed waters. Captain Elias Blackwood gripped the wheel of the Serpent's Revenge as massive waves crashed over the bow, threatening to tear his ship apart plank by plank. Lightning split the sky like God's own sword, illuminating the chaos that surrounded them. His crew scrambled across the deck, fighting to secure the rigging as the wind howled like a banshee. "Captain," shouted his first mate Marcus, struggling to be heard over the tempest. "There's a ship off the starboard bow, looks abandoned." Elias squinted through the rain and spray. There, barely visible through the wall of water and wind, sat a merchant vessel listing heavily to one side. Her sails were in tatters, her masts broken, and she rode the waves like a corpse. But something about her called to him. Perhaps it was the promise of salvage, or maybe something darker. "Take us closer," he bellowed, "but ready the guns in case it's a trap." As they approached, the ship's true condition became clear. She was a slaver's vessel, her holds likely filled with human misery until recently. Elias had seen plenty of these ships in his 20 years on the water, and they always left a bitter taste in his mouth. He'd chosen piracy over many things, but slavery wasn't one of them. The boarding was treacherous. Elias led a small party across the churning water, their ropes and grappling hooks the only things keeping them from being swept into the depths. The deck of the abandoned ship was slick with rain, and something else. Fear, perhaps, or death itself. "Search everything," Elias ordered. "Gold, supplies, anything useful. But watch yourselves." The ship creaked and groaned as his men spread out. Most of the cargo was gone, taken by whoever had abandoned her. But as Elias made his way toward the stern, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A soft whimpering, barely audible over the storm. Following the sound, he descended into the ship's belly. The stench hit him first. Unwashed bodies, sickness, and despair. The slave quarters were mostly empty, their shackles hanging open like broken promises. But in the far corner, huddled against the hull, was a figure so small he almost missed her. She was young, maybe 20, with dark skin that gleamed like polished mahogany in the lantern light. Her clothes were little more than rags, soaked through and clinging to her trembling frame. She looked up at him with eyes that held no hope, only the weary acceptance of someone who had already died inside. "Please," she whispered in accented English, her voice barely a breath. "Just make it quick." Elias felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen plenty of death, dealt it out with his own hands when necessary. But this woman, abandoned and left to freeze in the belly of a slave ship, stirred something in him he thought had died years ago. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice gentle despite the storm raging around them. "What's your name?" She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. They took my name, along with everything else." "Well then," Elias said, extending his hand, "we'll have to find you a new one. Can you walk?" She struggled to her feet, her legs shaking from cold and weakness. Elias wrapped his coat around her shoulders, feeling how small and fragile she was beneath the heavy fabric. "Why?" she asked as he helped her toward the ladder. "Why help me?" Elias paused, not sure how to answer. The truth was complicated, bound up in his own past, in choices he'd made and people he'd failed to save. "Because," he finally said, "everyone deserves a chance to choose their own fate." Getting her back to his ship was a nightmare. The storm had worsened, and the woman could barely stand, let alone navigate the treacherous crossing between vessels. But somehow, with Marcus's help and the loyalty of his crew, they managed it. Once aboard the Serpent's Revenge, Elias carried her to his own cabin, the only place on the ship with proper warmth and privacy. He settled her in his chair near the brazier and called for hot food and dry clothes. "Rest now," he told her as she clutched a mug of rum-laced tea with trembling hands. "We'll talk when the storm passes." But as he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Captain, thank you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a soul returning from the very edge of despair. Elias nodded once and stepped out into the storm, already wondering what he'd gotten himself into. 3 days passed before the storm finally broke, leaving the Caribbean waters deceptively calm under a blazing sun. Elias had barely slept, checking on the woman every few hours while maintaining his duties as captain. His crew whispered among themselves. Pirates weren't known for their charitable acts, and taking on a rescued slave raised questions about their captain's judgment. When she finally emerged from his cabin, the transformation was remarkable. Clean clothes and proper food had restored some color to her cheeks, though her eyes still held that haunted quality of someone who had seen too much. She moved carefully across the deck, unused to the rolling motion of a ship under sail, but determined to find her footing. "Feeling better?" Elias asked, approaching her at the rail where she stood watching the endless blue horizon. She nodded slowly. "Your crew doesn't trust me. My crew doesn't trust anyone at first. It's what keeps us alive." He studied her profile as she gazed out at the water. "You still haven't told me your name." "Because I don't remember it," she said quietly. "Or maybe I choose not to. The slavers called me many things, none of them my true name. On their ship, names were just another thing they stripped away." Elias felt that familiar anger stirring in his chest, the same rage that had driven him to piracy in the first place. "Then we'll call you something new, something that belongs only to you." She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw a spark of something beyond resignation in her dark eyes. "What did you have in mind?" "Marina," he said without hesitation. "Like the sea that brought us together." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Marina, I like that." She paused, then asked, "And what about you, Captain? What name do you choose to wear?" "Elias Blackwood, though most just call me Captain." "What were you before you became a pirate, Elias Blackwood?" The question caught him off guard. Most people aboard his ship knew better than to ask about his past. "That's a long story," he said carefully. "We seem to have plenty of time," Marina replied, gesturing toward the vast ocean around them. Before Elias could respond, Marcus appeared at his shoulder. "Captain, we need to discuss provisions, and there's the matter of our next destination." Elias nodded, but Marina placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "If there's work I can do—" "You're recovering," Elias said firmly. "I'm not made of glass," she interrupted, and there was steel in her voice that surprised him. "I've survived things that would break most people. I can handle whatever work you have." Marcus looked skeptical. "Captain, with respect, this ain't a place for what?" Marina's eyes flashed. "For a woman? For someone who was enslaved? I assure you I'm stronger than I look." To prove her point, she strode over to where two crew members were struggling with a tangled section of rigging. Without hesitation, she grabbed hold of the rope and began working the knots free with practiced fingers. Within minutes, she had untangled what had been frustrating the sailors for the better part of an hour. "My father was a fisherman," she explained when she saw their surprised faces. "I knew boats before I knew how to walk properly." One of the sailors, a grizzled man named Tom, grinned and spat over the side. "Well, I'll be damned. She's got sailor's hands, Captain." Word spread quickly through the ship, and by evening Marina had earned a grudging respect from most of the crew. She worked without complaint, asked intelligent questions, and proved she could hold her own in the rough company of pirates. More importantly, she didn't shy away from the darker aspects of their life. She understood violence, understood survival. That night, as the crew gathered for their evening meal, Marina sat beside Elias at the captain's table. The conversation flowed around them, talk of targets, weather, and the eternal search for fresh water and supplies. But Elias found himself watching Marina more than listening to his men. "You're thinking something," she said quietly, noticing his attention. "I'm thinking you're not what you seem," he replied honestly. "None of us are." She took a sip of wine, real wine, not the usual rum, and met his gaze. "You saved my life, but you didn't do it out of simple kindness. There's something in your past that made you pull me from that ship." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Around them, his crew continued their conversations, but he felt as though he and Marina existed in a bubble of honesty. "I had a sister once," he finally said, "younger than me. She was taken by slavers when I was barely old enough to understand what that meant. What happened to her? I don't know. I searched for years, followed every lead, boarded every slaver I could find. Never found her." He stared into his cup. "When I saw you in that ship for a moment, it was like I was being given another chance." Marina reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I'm not your sister, Elias. I know that, but I am grateful. And I'm here now by my own choice." She squeezed his hand gently. What will you do with that second chance? Before he could answer, a shout came from the crow's nest. Sail ho! 3 points off the starboard bow. Elias was on his feet instantly, his personal concerns forgotten. Through his spyglass he could see a Spanish galleon heavy in the water, likely carrying treasure from the New World back to Europe. His crew gathered around him, eyes bright with the prospect of plunder. What's the plan, Captain? Marcus asked. Elias studied the distant ship, calculating wind, position, and opportunity. But as he lowered his spyglass, he caught sight of Marina standing at the rail, her face a mask of complex emotions. He realized this would be her first real taste of what his life truly entailed. Not just survival, but predation. We take her at dawn, he decided, but cleanly. No unnecessary bloodshed. As his crew dispersed to prepare for battle, Marina remained at the rail. Elias approached her slowly. Having second thoughts about your new life? He asked. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight her eyes were unreadable. No, she said simply. But I need to know, when we take that ship tomorrow, what happens to the people aboard? That depends on them, Elias replied honestly. If they surrender, they live. If they fight, he shrugged. Marina nodded slowly. Then I suppose we'll see what kind of pirate I'm meant to be. The words hung between them like a challenge, and Elias realized that tomorrow would change everything. Not just for his crew, but for whatever was growing between him and the woman he'd pulled from the depths of despair. Dawn came painted in shades of crimson and gold, as if the sea itself knew what was about to unfold. The Spanish galleon Santa Isabella sat heavy in the water, her hull riding low with the weight of New World treasure. Elias stood at the bow of the Serpent's Revenge, watching his prey through the morning mist while his crew made final preparations for the attack. Marina stood beside him, dressed in clothes borrowed from the ship's stores, dark breeches, a white shirt, and a leather vest that had belonged to a crew member who died in their last engagement. She'd braided her hair back and secured it with a strip of cloth, transforming herself from rescued victim to something harder, more dangerous. You don't have to be part of this, Elias said quietly, noting the tension in her shoulders. Yes, I do, she replied without taking her eyes off the galleon. If I'm to be part of this crew, part of this life, then I need to understand what that means. All of it. Marcus approached with the battle plan. Wind's with us, Captain. We can come at them from the sun, use the glare to our advantage. They'll never see us coming until we're close enough to board. Elias nodded, but his attention was divided between the tactical situation and Marina's reaction to it. She listened intently as Marcus detailed their approach, asking sharp questions about positioning and timing that surprised the first mate. You've done this before, Marcus observed. Not piracy, Marina said, but I've seen enough naval engagements. My village was attacked by raiders when I was 15. I learned that understanding your enemy's movements can mean the difference between life and death. The attack began an hour later. The Serpent's Revenge swept down on the galleon like a bird of prey, her black sails cutting through the morning light. The Spanish crew was caught completely off guard, some still eating breakfast, others securing cargo below decks. By the time they spotted the pirate ship, it was too late to mount an effective defense. Give them a taste of our guns, Elias shouted, and the ship's cannons roared to life. The shots were carefully aimed, enough to disable the galleon's ability to flee, but not enough to sink her and send her treasure to the bottom. Marina watched the battle unfold with an intensity that unnerved some of the crew. She didn't flinch when the cannons fired, didn't look away when Spanish sailors screamed and fell. Instead, she studied every movement, every decision, learning the brutal choreography of naval combat. When the Serpent's Revenge pulled alongside the galleon for boarding, Marina was among the first to grab a rope and swing across. She landed on the Spanish deck with cat-like grace, a cutlass in her hand that she'd taken from the ship's armory. Stay close to me, Elias called to her as they advanced on the Spanish crew. But Marina was already moving, her blade dancing through the morning air as she engaged a Spanish officer who'd tried to flank their position. The fight was brutal, but brief. The Spanish crew, caught unprepared and outnumbered, offered little resistance once their captain fell. Within minutes, the deck was secured, and Elias's men were already moving toward the hold, where the real treasure waited. It was in the ship's lower decks that they found something unexpected. Hidden beneath the gold and silver, behind false bulkheads, were 20 Caribbean natives, Men, women, and children chained together like cargo. They'd been taken from various islands, destined for the slave markets of Europe. Marina froze when she saw them, her face going pale. For a moment, Elias thought she might collapse, but instead, she knelt beside a young girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. The child looked up at her with eyes that held the same hollow despair Marina's had carried just days before. "We're going to get you out of here," Marina whispered in Spanish, her voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now." The liberation of the enslaved people created an unexpected complication. Elias had planned a simple raid: take the treasure, perhaps recruit any willing sailors, and disappear into the Caribbean's countless hiding places. But now he had 20 terrified, malnourished people who needed immediate care and a way home. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, pulling Elias aside, "we can't take them all aboard. We don't have the supplies, and some of the men are already grumbling about sharing provisions." Elias looked across the deck where Marina was helping distribute food and water to the freed captives. She'd taken charge of their care without being asked, organizing his crew into an efficient rescue operation. Several of his men, tough pirates who'd spent years caring only for themselves, were following her orders without question. "We'll manage," Elias decided. "Signal the crew to transfer all the food and water from this ship to ours, and send word to find any clothes that might fit them." The transfer took most of the day. By evening, the Serpent's Revenge was crowded beyond capacity, but every freed captive was aboard and receiving care. Marina had appointed herself their advocate and protector, ensuring they were fed, clothed, and given space to rest away from the curious stares of the crew. As night fell, Elias found her sitting with the young girl she'd first comforted, teaching her simple English words while they shared a meal. The sight stirred something complex in his chest, admiration mixed with something deeper, more dangerous. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" he said when Marina finally joined him at the stern rail. "What do you mean?" "Today you became a pirate, not just in name, but in truth. You fought alongside my crew, you helped take that ship, and now you're responsible for 20 lives that depend on our protection." Marina was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars reflect on the dark water. "Do you regret pulling me from that slave ship?" she finally asked. "No," Elias replied without hesitation. "Do you regret letting me?" "No." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, he could see that something fundamental had changed in her expression. The hopeless resignation was gone, replaced by something fiercer, more alive. "But I need to know something, Elias. What happens to them?" She gestured toward where the freed captives were settling in for the night. "We take them home, all of them, to whatever islands they came from. Even though it means giving up weeks of sailing time, even though some of your crew would rather sell them for profit." Elias moved closer to her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "Marina, I've spent 10 years as a pirate, taking what I needed to survive. But I've never, not once, profited from human misery. That's not who I am, and it's not who my crew is. Any man who has a problem with that can find himself another ship at the next port." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her since that day in the storm. "Then I chose well when I decided to trust you. Did you have a choice?" "There's always a choice," she said firmly, "even when it doesn't feel like it. Even when you're chained in the bottom of a slave ship waiting to die. There's always a choice about who you decide to be." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the main deck. Marcus was arguing with several crew members, their voices raised in anger. Elias and Marina hurried forward to find the source of the conflict. "What's the problem?" Elias demanded. "It's Thompson and his mates," Marcus explained. "They're saying we should have left the slaves on the Spanish ship. They think we're fools for taking on extra mouths to feed when we don't even know where we're sailing next." Thompson, a burly sailor with scars across his face, stepped forward. "With respect, Captain, we're pirates, not missionaries. This ain't what we signed up for." Before Elias could respond, Marina moved to stand beside him. When she spoke, her voice carried across the deck with surprising authority. "You're right," she said, addressing Thompson directly. "You didn't sign up to be missionaries. You signed up to be pirates. And pirates take what they want, when they want it, from whoever has it." She gestured toward the hold where their treasure was stored. "Today you took enough Spanish gold to keep you drunk and well-fed for a year. Are you really so greedy that you'd begrudge these people a few weeks of ship's biscuit and water?" Thompson's face reddened. "It's not about the food, woman, it's about what we are. We're not heroes." "No," Marina agreed. "You're not heroes. You're pirates, but you're also men. And any man who would leave children chained in the dark because it's inconvenient to help them, well, that's not a man I'd want watching my back in a fight. A murmur ran through the assembled crew. Several men nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. Elias realized that Marina had done something remarkable. She'd reframed the argument in terms the crew could understand and respect. Besides, she continued, do any of you really think Captain Blackwood would sail with cowards? Because that's what you'd be if you let fear of a little hard work stop you from doing what's right. Thompson looked around for support, but found most of the crew staring at their feet or nodding in agreement with Marina. Finally, he shrugged and walked away, muttering under his breath. As the crowd dispersed, Elias found himself alone with Marina once again. That was well done, he said quietly. I meant every word. She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Elias, I want you to know something. What happened today helping those people? It's the first time since I was captured that I felt like myself again. Not a victim, not cargo, not someone else's property. Just myself. And who is that? He asked gently. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. I'm still figuring that out. But I know she's someone who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. Someone who chooses mercy when she has the power to choose cruelty. Someone who... She paused, seeming to gather courage. Someone who cares about a pirate captain who saved her life. The words hung between them like a confession, and Elias felt his carefully maintained distance beginning to crumble. He'd told himself that rescuing her was about redemption, about making up for his failure to save his sister. But looking at Marina now, strong, compassionate, unbroken despite everything she'd endured, he realized his feelings had become something far more complicated and dangerous. Marina, he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. You don't have to say anything, she said. I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens next, whatever choices we make, I want you to know that you gave me back something I thought was lost forever. You gave me back myself. With that, she turned and walked toward the bow, leaving Elias alone with the realization that somewhere between saving her life and watching her save others, he'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her. And in the dangerous world of Caribbean piracy, love was the most treacherous waters of all. 2 months had passed since the rescue of the enslaved captives, and the Serpent's Revenge had become something unprecedented in the Caribbean, a pirate ship that served as sanctuary. Word had spread through the island's hidden networks that Captain Blackwood offered safe passage to escaped slaves and protection to those fleeing oppression. His crew had grown from 30 to nearly 50, a mix of former slaves, displaced natives, and pirates who'd grown tired of serving only greed. Marina had become more than just another crew member. She was Elias's unofficial second-in-command, the voice of conscience that guided their increasingly complex operations. She'd proven herself in 6 engagements, her tactical mind as sharp as her blade. More importantly, she'd become the heart of their strange new brotherhood, the one who reminded them that they were more than just thieves with ships. But success had brought attention they didn't want. Governor Harrison of Jamaica had put a substantial bounty on Elias's head, and Spanish naval patrols had increased throughout their hunting grounds. Worse still, other pirate captains had begun to see their humanitarian efforts as weakness, a sign that the infamous Blackwood had gone soft. It was on a sweltering afternoon in late September that their new reality came to a head. The ship had put in at Tortuga for supplies and to allow the crew some time ashore when Marcus brought disturbing news from the taverns. Captain Vega's in port, Marcus reported, his expression grim. He's been asking questions about us, specifically about Marina. Elias felt ice form in his stomach. Captain Diego Vega was one of the most brutal pirates in the Caribbean, a man who dealt in slaves, drugs, and any other human misery that turned a profit. He commanded a fleet of 3 ships and had no qualms about torture, rape, or murder to get what he wanted. What kind of questions? Marina asked. She'd been teaching some of the younger crew members to read, but now her attention was fully focused on the threat. He knows about the Santa Isabella rescue, Marcus continued. Knows you were the one who organized caring for the captives. Word is he thinks you're making pirates look weak, and he wants to make an example. Elias's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. How many men does he have with him? 40, maybe 50. But Captain, he's not looking for a fair fight. He sent word that he wants to meet with you. Alone. Says he has a proposition. It's a trap, Marina said immediately. He wants to draw you away from the ship, from the crew. Of course it's a trap, Elias replied. But we can't run forever. Sooner or later, we have to face what we've become. That evening, as the sun set over Tortuga's notorious harbor, Elias made his way to the designated meeting place, a ramshackle tavern called the Drowned Sailor. Vega was waiting for him, a tall, scarred man with dead eyes and a smile that never reached them. He sat alone at a corner table, but Elias could see his men positioned throughout the room. "Blackwood," Vega said as Elias approached. "You look well for a man who's forgotten what it means to be a pirate, and you look like a man who never learned the difference between strength and cruelty," Elias replied, taking the seat across from him but keeping his hand near his weapon. Vega laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Straight to business. I like that. Here's my proposition. Give me the woman and I'll let you and your crew leave Tortuga alive." "What woman?" "Don't insult my intelligence. The Caribbean beauty you pulled from that slave ship, the one who's been filling your head with ideas about mercy and redemption." Vega's smile widened. "I have buyers who are very interested in her. Seems word of her spirit has reached some wealthy collectors." Elias felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "And if I refuse? Then you'll discover just how many friends you've lost by playing saint. Half the pirates in these waters think you've gone soft, Blackwood. They're ready to fall in line behind someone who remembers what we really are." "Which is?" "Predators," Vega said simply. "We take what we want and kill anyone who tries to stop us. Your little charity operation has been bad for business. Men are starting to think they can refuse orders, demand better treatment, even escape their bonds. You've given them hope, and hope is dangerous." Elias stood slowly. "Then I suppose we understand each other perfectly." "Do we?" Vega's eyes glittered dangerously. "Because I'm offering you one last chance to remember who you are. Give me the woman, go back to proper piracy, and I'll consider letting you live." "Here's my counteroffer," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet tavern. "Take your proposition and your buyers and sail out of these waters. If I see you again, I'll send you to the bottom." Vega's pleasant mask finally slipped, revealing the monster beneath. "You fool. You think love makes you strong? It makes you weak, and weakness gets you killed." Elias was already moving when Vega reached for his pistol. The captain's blade cleared its sheath and opened Vega's throat before the gun could clear its holster. But even as Vega fell, his men were moving, and the tavern erupted in violence. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Elias found himself surrounded, his swordwork the only thing keeping him alive as Vega's crew tried to overwhelm him. Just when it seemed he might be overrun, the tavern doors burst open and Marina charged in, followed by a dozen of his most trusted men. "Did you really think I'd let you face this alone?" she shouted over the clash of steel, her own blade finding the heart of a pirate who'd been about to shoot Elias in the back. Together, they carved their way through Vega's crew, but victory came at a cost. 3 of Elias's men lay dead, and Marina had taken a sword cut across her ribs that left her shirt soaked with blood. "We need to get back to the ship," Marcus said urgently. "Vega's other vessels will be moving to blockade the harbor." The race back to the Serpent's Revenge was a nightmare of narrow alleys and pursuing enemies. By the time they reached the docks, 2 of Vega's ships were already moving to cut off their escape route. The third was bearing down on their position, her guns run out and ready to fire. "All hands," Elias shouted as they leaped aboard. "Prepare for battle. Cut the anchor line and get us moving." The next hour was the most desperate of Elias's career. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Serpent's Revenge fought her way out of Tortuga's harbor through sheer skill and determination. Marina, despite her wound, stood at Elias's side on the quarterdeck, calling out tactical suggestions and encouraging the crew. They lost the enemy ships in a maze of reefs and shallow channels that Elias knew better than any man alive, but the cost was severe. In addition to the men lost in the tavern, 2 more had died in the sea battle, and half the crew bore wounds of varying severity. As dawn broke over calm waters, Elias found Marina in his cabin, finally allowing the ship's doctor to tend to her injury. The cut was deep but clean, requiring stitches but posing no immediate danger. "You shouldn't have come for me," Elias said quietly, sitting beside her as the doctor worked. "Yes, I should have," she replied through gritted teeth. "That's what people do when they love each other. They fight together." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. They'd danced around their feelings for months, But the night's violence had stripped away all pretense. "Marina," Elias began, but she silenced him with a look. "Don't you dare tell me it's too dangerous, or that you're not worthy, or any of the other noble nonsense you've been using to keep me at arm's length," she said fiercely. "We're pirates, Elias. Our entire lives are dangerous. The question is whether we face that danger alone or together." When the doctor finished and left them alone, Elias moved to the windows, staring out at the endless blue horizon. "Vega was right about one thing," he said finally. "What we've become, what we're trying to do. It's made us enemies, not just of the Spanish or the British, but of our own kind." "Good," Marina said firmly. "If being their enemy means we don't enslave children or profit from human misery, then I'm proud to be their enemy." Elias turned back to her, seeing the woman who'd emerged from the broken girl he'd rescued. She was magnificent, fierce, compassionate, uncompromising in her principles, and she was offering him something he'd never dared hope for, a chance at redemption that didn't require him to sacrifice who he'd become. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, moving to kneel beside her chair, "about why I really saved you that night." Marina's expression softened. "I already know. It was about your sister." "No," Elias said, taking her hands in his. "That's what I told myself, but it wasn't true. I saved you because from the moment I saw you, something in my soul recognized something in yours. I saved you because I was already falling in love with you, even though I didn't understand it yet." Tears gathered in Marina's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "And I fell in love with the man who chose mercy over profit, who risked everything to save people he didn't even know. We're a pair of fools, aren't we?" "The very worst kind," Elias agreed, leaning forward to kiss her gently. When they parted, Marina's expression grew serious. "So what now? Vega's dead, but his allies will come for us. The governors have bounties on our heads. How do we build a life when half the world wants us dead?" Elias stood and moved to his charts, pointing to a cluster of small islands in the eastern Caribbean. "There," he said, "the Windward Islands. Small enough to escape notice, large enough to support a colony. We establish a base, a place where freed slaves and escaped captives can start new lives. We become more than pirates. We become protectors, a pirate republic built on freedom instead of greed," Marina mused. "It's ambitious. It's dangerous. It's probably impossible." She grinned. "I love it." Over the following weeks, as they sailed toward their chosen sanctuary, the crew of the Serpent's Revenge began to transform once again. They were no longer just pirates or even just liberators. They were pioneers carrying the seeds of something unprecedented in the Caribbean. A place where a person's worth wasn't measured by the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth, but by their willingness to stand up for others. Marina and Elias were married by the ship's chaplain, a former priest who'd joined them after escaping religious persecution. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, conducted on deck under a canopy of stars while dolphins played in their wake. "Do you think we'll succeed?" Marina asked that night as they lay together in their cabin, the steady rhythm of the waves lulling them toward sleep. "I think," Elias said, pulling her closer, "that we'll try. And sometimes, trying is enough to change the world." 3 months later, the settlement of New Haven was established on a pristine island that had never appeared on any official chart. Former slaves worked alongside reformed pirates to build homes, farms, and workshops. Children who'd known only chains now played freely on beaches where the only law was the one they made together. Captain Elias Blackwood and Marina Blackwood had found their redemption not in abandoning their past, but in using it to build a future worth fighting for. And in the Caribbean waters where they'd first found each other, their legend grew, not as the most feared pirates, but as the couple who proved that even in the darkest of waters, love could chart a course to freedom. The storm had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay together that changed everything that came after.